This is a tongue-wagging interview of late President Mugabe by Christiane Amanpour of CNN a day before addressing the United Nations in 2009.
Mr. President, what are you going to ask? Are you going to ask President Obama to lift the sanctions that are imposed?
Not really. I haven't come here for President Obama to address the United States alone. I've come here to address the General Assembly, which is part of the United Nations structures, and we are entitled to discuss matters that affect us in the global environment and the matters that affect us in a particular way as Zimbabwe, and this is what I'm going to do.
But you obviously are calling for sanctions to be lifted.
Oh yes, that I will do, certainly. The sanctions are unjustified, illegal, and they are meant for regime change, to address that illegal principle.
You say for regime change, but it all really is about trying to get the political situation stabilized. And for the last year, you've been in so-called power-sharing agreement with the leader of the opposition, Morgan Tsvangirai. What does power-sharing mean to you? Many people say that it's in the name only right now.
No, it is really power sharing, and that power sharing is escapulated in an agreement we call the Global Political Agreement, and this was arrived at through the facilitation that we got from South Africa, and specifically through the facilitation by former President Thabo Mbeki.
The problem though is, Mr. President, that many people are saying you are still, and your party is trying to sort of reduce the MDC majority, all the officials in parliament. There are members of parliament who are being arrested. They are being charged with alleged crimes to prevent them from being able to take office. Why is this still happening?
First, may I make this quite clear, that a global political agreement was arrived at after a series of meetings which involved not just ZANU-PF, as represented by myself and our negotiators, and numbered also between ZANU-PF and the MDC, as represented by Tsvangirai and Professor Chambara and their negotiators.
Right.
And these provisions in the global agreement were reached after very strenuous discussion had taken place.
Right, but the question really is.
And so they were not forced upon us. We came to.
No, but the question really is.
We came to them deliberately.
All right, so why then?
We arrived at them deliberately.
All right, so if you say you've arrived at them deliberately, why then are there members of parliament and officials still being harassed?
Because the issue of those who have been arrested is a different matter altogether. Some of them had committed crimes before the global agreement, crimes such as rape and kidnapping. You couldn't let people who have committed such crimes get away with it merely because there's a global agreement.
Has Roy Bennett committed a crime? Why is he not being sworn in?
Roy Bennett has been charged, and on the face of it, the charges are very serious. But I'm told this by the leader of the MDC, that the prosecution is addressing no evidence. There are no witnesses, and I've said, if there are no witnesses, the prosecution will arrive at a time when they will say so.
So charged with what?
But let's not read that for them. Let them read that conclusion on their own.
Do you think that he will? Do you think that he will be appointed?
I have. Yes. If he is acquitted, he will be appointed.
But charged with what?
Charged with having, tried to put, I think he was found responsible for, that's the allegation. The allegation is that he's responsible for organizing arms of war against Zimbabwe.
Well, we'll obviously have to ask him about that, but...
And that, these are the charges that are being made on the face of them.
Well...
But if the prosecution cannot prove that, in fact, he did so, then, in fact, he's guilty of, trying to organize you.
Mr. Mugabe, that's certainly the first I'm hearing of it, and we'll obviously put that to them. But can I say this? There are a lot of people, and you've heard in the report, who considered you an African hero back in 1980, that you came, and some of my own friends, Rhodesians, some of people I've worked with who were in the Rhodesian army, then became journalists in Rhodesia, were stunned by the conciliatory nature and the addresses that you gave back in 1980.
Yes.
And describe how 10 years your policies led to prosperity, led to successes in the mining and agriculture and all sorts of things. And then over the last 10 years, things have really gone south in a big and bad way. Why is it that that's happened?
Over the last 10 years?
No, since land reform. And remember that the presidents of Mozambique and Tanzania, when you took the country to liberation, said to you that you have the jewel of Africa in your hands. Now look after it.
Yes, we are looking.
Did you look after it?
Yes, in a very great way. Over the last 10 years, we have had ZIDRA, the sanctions imposed on us by the United States, plus sanctions imposed upon us by the European Union over the last 10 years.
Right, but they're specifically targeted sanctions.
No.
Against individual, not against the trade or development.
Zimbabwe? No. The United States sanctions on us are real sanctions, economic sanctions. Have you looked at that? Look at them, and you will satisfy yourselves that they prevent companies from having any dealings with us.
But they're very, very specifically targeted.
They prevent any. They prevent any financial institution
But how do you account?
also from having any relations with us.
But for this incredible statistics, where since you took over, life expectancy has dropped, manufacturing has fallen.
But I'm just telling you.
1 in 14 people are malnourished.
I'm just telling you the reasons. It's because of sanctions mainly.
But everybody says it's not because of sanctions, it's because of mismanagement.
Not everybody says so.
Most people do. Most independent observers say that.
In Zimbabwe, it's not true.
How to get out of this now? How to get out of this? Do you think, for instance, right now?
The sanctions. Sanctions must be lifted, and we should have no interference from outside. The continued imperialistic interference in our affairs is affecting the country, obviously.
I would like to play one soundbite by a neighbor of yours, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who said the following. He's destroyed a wonderful country, a country that used to be a bread basket. It has now become a basket case itself. But I think now, that the world must say, look, you have been responsible with your cohorts. You've been responsible for gross violations, and you are going to face indictment in Hague, and unless you step down.
No, it's not a basket case at all. Last year, we managed to grow enough food for ourselves. We are not a basket case anymore.
1 in 14 people are called malnourished?
No.
Your country is practically dependent on humanitarian aid.
Just now, you are not talking of the present.
I know things have got slightly better in the last year.
They have got much better in terms of food.
But it's still like a war zone.
People have grown enough food for themselves. We've had years, continuous, successive years of drought. Don't forget that. And in addition,
I've seen drought figures. I've got all the statistics here.
Sanctions as well.
Yes.
And combine the effect of drought with the effect of sanctions. And what do you get?
Well, and the effect of what many people are saying, the land reform, that really created this huge discrepancy in your ability to farm.
The land?
We are now going to a break, and we'll talk about that when we come back, all right? We are going to an ad break now. We'll talk about that when we come back, all right?
Yes, but the land reform is the best thing that could ever happen.
The best thing?
Yes, that could ever happen to an African country.
We'll talk about it in a second.
It has to do with national sovereignty.
Okay, let's talk about it in a second.
I'll never surrender. Zimbabwe is mine. I'm a Zimbabwean. Zimbabwe for Zimbabweans. Zimbabwe never for the British. Britain for the British.
Is that just a political rhetoric? Or did you mean that? What did you mean?
That Zimbabwe belongs to the Zimbabwean people.
Right. Do you consider?
Pure and simple.
And everybody believes that?
Oh yes, all people believe it.
So do you consider white Zimbabweans to be Zimbabweans?
Those who are naturalized and have citizenship, yes.
Those who've been living there for years and years and years?
But historically,
right.
Historically, they have a debt.
the people who contribute to farming historically have the right or have the debt to pay.
Yes, their land. They occupy the land illegally. They seize the land from our people.
Look,
And therefore, the process of reform, land reform, involved their having to hand over the land. We agreed upon this with the British, by the way.
some 80% of that land was acquired after you took office. Some of the farmland, and with very certificates that mean government's approval. Why are these people being hounded out of the country? Why are they being
They're not. They're not being hounded.
hounded off their land then?
No. They're not being hounded out of the country at all.
We've just done reports about it.
Those who are in industry, in manufacturing and mining are not being.
They are farmers I'm talking about. Why is that?
They're not, being affected.
Wonderful farmland, and why are they being?
What are you talking about? We are getting land from them, and that is all. They're not being hounded out of the country. Not
Yeah.
at all.
They are being hounded off their land.
Their land,
It's not theirs.
our land.
Even though they bought it. With the certificates of approval from government.
But haven't you heard of the Lancaster House discussions and the agreement with the British government? Because they are British settlers. Originally, they've been British settlers. And we agreed at Lancaster House that there will be land reform.
But they are citizens, aren't they? And isn't this farming disaster contributing to your?
Citizens by colonization, seizing land from the original people, indigenous people of the country.
But how did that all go so wrong?
You approve of that?
How did that all go so wrong? Because when you came in, it was about reconciliation.
They knew about it. They knew we had this program of land acquisition and land reform.
But
they
what about
knew
the
about it.
But what about the blacks then?
And the British knew about it.
Okay, let's talk about the black farmers whose houses and shanty houses and who work on these farms. They are being bulldozed in an operation that was called Drive Out the Rubbish. These are black Zimbabweans.
No, not at all. There was no operation of that nature.
But well, how come they are being driven off their shanty houses?
Who?
They are farm workers.
No, you're mistaken about the Mrabanshina program, which had to do with slums, getting rid of slums, not getting rid of farm workers. No, it had nothing to do with farm workers at all. Farm workers, by the way, were to be given three choices. One, they could remain on the farm under the new owner and continue working on the farm. And two, if they were alien.
The accusation was that they were opposition.
Let me, if they were alien, and most of them from Mozambique, and let's say Zambia, they could choose to go home, in which case, we will discuss the package that they deserved. 3, they could decide to leave the farm and go elsewhere. And also, if they wanted to get resettled, we could also resettle them.
Mr. Mugabe.
Under our program of resettling,
the fact is, though, that the country has pretty much plunked into a pretty dysfunctional state by all the international indicators.
No.
My question is, do you regret that some 4 million people have left in the last 3 to 5 years?
I don't know about those numbers.
But do you regret? Because they are these that are brain dead. These are the people who've helped make Zimbabwe the success that it was.
Because of the economic situation?
Okay.
People are bound to leave any country, and they have not just left my country. They have left other countries as well to go to Britain, Australia, and other places.
Let me ask you a question about.
And at the moment, they are coming back home anyway.
Let me ask you a question. we'll move on from this and we'll ask you a question about. You heard about what Archbishop Desmond Tutu said.
That's nonsense. It's just a devilish talk.
Devilish talk?
Oh yes.
Do you?
He doesn't know what he's talking about. That little man.
The little man? He's a Nobel Peace Prize winner.
Oh, come on.
He's a liberation fighter too.
What? What liberation?
South Africa.
No, of course, you don't know what his status in the ANC amounts to.
Can I ask you a question about Nelson Mandela?
He's a great man. That one, yes.
Nelson Mandela has got so much of attention for being the great liberator of Africa.
Yes.
You did it earlier. Do you sometimes wish that you got as much attention?
President Mandela is President Mandela, and Robert Mugabe is Robert Mugabe. Look at him in his own circumstances, and that is it. If you damn him, well and good. But I know my people have great praise for me. I know the African people think very highly of me.
Are you?
And that satisfies me.
It does.
Oh yes.
Even though you lost those elections.
Which elections?
The last ones.
No, we didn't lose the elections at all.
But that's why you're going into a power sharing group. Look.
Come on.
We can argue about this, but my question is this. Why is it so difficult to leave power in a reasonable way when you are up, instead of waiting until it gets to this stage?
You don't leave power when imperialists dictate that you have to leave.
No imperialist. You are the president.
No, there is regime change. Haven't you heard of regime change program by Britain and the United States, which is aimed at getting not just Robert Mugabe out of power, but Robert Mugabe and his party out of power? And that naturally means we dig in, remain in our trenches.
Are you going to stand for elections again?
That will depend on what I decide to do in the future.
Can you tell us?
No, not now.
Can you imagine running for another election?
I won't tell you that now, I say.
Are you afraid, as some suggested, that one day you might be you might be indicted by the International Criminal Court?
No, I don't care about that. The international, what they decide is entirely their own affair. Their own affair. I'm concerned about Zimbabwe, and I'm concerned about the lives of the people of Zimbabwe. And don't forget, it was my party which brought democracy into the country. I fought the British. We had to fight the British for democracy, for one man, one person, and one vote.
And that's why people are so disappointed in what happened, because you do get the kudos for having brought that.
But that is still the environment.
But now people, and yet this election was so heavily disputed that you had to go into a power sharing deal.
Well, elections are...
I guess I want to know why. Why hang on for so long?
Elections don't go all that smoothly all the time in many countries. That is the situation. Look at what happens elsewhere. They don't go smoothly here during the first term. Before the first term of office of President Bush, you know what happened in Florida? The 400,000 votes, where did they go? They were stolen by Bush. And you people said nothing about it.
Well, it was very heavily covered, and there is a dispute about the word stolen. But here's the thing. The power sharing agreement in Zimbabwe, do you think that that's actually going to be a real power sharing agreement? I mean, you do control all the heavy duty ministers, defense, police, mining. Is there going to be a real power sharing? Is it going to get better?
The inclusive government is a real power sharing arrangement. Don't denigrate it.
All right.
We have 14 countries in SADC which are responsible for assisting us in bringing that about, and for assisting us also in making it run.
All right.
And read what they say. Listen to what they say.
All right, Mr. Mugabe. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for.